Data Kind of LA 2021. Welcome to the Data for Good track. My name is Courtney Fowler. I'll be your host today. And our co-host today is Stephen Kwok. We'll be moderating the chat and the Q&A during this session. Today we have our guest, Priscila Baddouh, and she'll be going over and talking with her presentation on using data to identify needs of foster care youth. Quick rundown on Priscila's background. Priscila is a senior analyst at Econ 1 Research. She specializes in economic and statistical analysis. She has practiced in the fields of healthcare, antitrust, educational program evaluation, educational research focused on K-12 teachers' experiences, and research on the impact of Head Start programs on early childhood. Priscila's experiences includes the analysis of large and complex data sets, data management, data visualization, and creation of complex statistical models, statistical sampling, forecasting models, and qualitative data collecting instruments such as interviews and focus groups. Thanks for welcoming Priscila Baddouh.
Okay, thank you. Let's start this. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Please let me know if you have any problem seeing it. It should work, but we'll see. Okay, well, hi everyone. I'm going to be talking about using data to identify needs of foster care youth. And to me, this was a very, very interesting project. We started at the end of last year when this company, this nonprofit company called Think of Us approached us. So I want to start by talking about who is Think of Us, because actually I didn't know anything about them before I started working in this project. And it's very interesting because, so this guy called Six to Cancel, he was the one who created this nonprofit. And he wrote this article this last week for the New York Times in which he really explains his story. And I was reading about it too, and to me it was really, really interesting because he went through the system. I mean, he was in the foster care system since he was a baby. So he really experienced the challenges of it through his own life. And to me, at the same time, this project was very interesting in a sense that my father also went through the system. Not here, but in Brazil. We don't have a real foster care system in Brazil. They are orphanages, but he also he was left in an orphanage when he was just 2 years old. So I could see the impact of it in his life. And reading the stories that I read in this survey, I was like, whoa, this is really, really relevant, really, really interesting. But going back to Think of Us, what they are trying to do is really to create this bridge between the foster care, people who are in the foster care system and policymakers, and try to create this space in which policymakers understand what is going on, and also start thinking about first how to avoid children to even get in the foster care system, and how to help the children who are there and who are transitioning to become adults. And then last year, what happens with Think of Us is that they partner with this other nonprofit organization and they create this microcash grant. And they did, the goal was to give up to $1,000 to people who are still in the system or who are transitioning, okay? And they did this survey in which respondents could participate in October and November of last year. And then at the end of November, beginning of December was when they approached us and they were like, well, we have this survey, we have all this data, and can you guys help us to first just process the data and then understand it and see what are the voices that are coming from this survey. And there were a lot of questions. There were 136 questions. And we had questions that were open-ended questions, and we also had categorical questions. So the main goal of this survey was to help some of those respondents, but it was also to be able to have this data that can inform policymakers about what to do, what are policies that they can think about to help the children that are still in the foster care system or that are about to leave. And right now we have 37 states that are using or the report that we created with Think of Us or the clean data to do exactly that, to allocate funds for people who are in the system or who just left the system.
Excuse me, Priscilla. I think your slides are frozen.
Oh no! Yes, I'm going little by little. I'm sorry. Is that okay?
No, it's still stuck at the very first slide.
Is it? Okay.
Yes.
Let me try again. Are you able to see it changing?
No.
No.
It changed before, but not now.
Let me stop sharing for a second and then start sharing again and see if it's going to work. So this is the last slide that I was on. I would change to the next one. Can you see the next one?
Yeah, so we're not on microcash grant right now.
Okay, yes, that's the one that I just finished talking about. Okay, so anyway, let's continue this. So we had all those questions, different kind of domains. We have demographic information, we have education, employment, experience in the foster care system, questions related to health, both physical and mental. And some of the questions were actually about just relationships. It was like, do you have a mentor? Do you have someone that you trust? And things like that. And we also have questions related to food security, financial security, housing security, and their needs. In this presentation, I'm going to be focusing on food security, financial security, and housing security. Okay. So let's start with the demographic information. And I hope you guys can see a histogram. I hope you can see a histogram right now.
No, I think you may have to click through manually each slide as you go because it did not.
Okay. Can you see a histogram?
Yes.
You can. Great. Okay, so we have like over 27,000 respondents in our study. But one thing that we started noticing is that a lot of them were in this between 18 and 21 years old. So we went back to Think of Us and we asked them, is there like a group that you guys are interested in? And they will start saying, well, I think 14 to 27 makes sense. And what we did, and you're going to see that in this presentation, is we have we use between 14 to 27 years old, but we broke down in different age groups. So the first age group that we focus on is 14 to 17. And the reason for that is because, well, those are the children that are still in the system. The next group that you're going to see again and again is going to be 18 to 21. And that is the group that may be in the system or maybe not be in the system anymore. And the reason for that is because different states in the US approve, some of them approve extensions that go up to 21 years old. Some of the extensions may always also be up to 22 or 23, but then it's normally based on disabilities. So, but anyway, this group between 18 and 21 is a mix. You have people who are still in the system and people who aged out. Then you have the 21 and 23. That's the group that is most likely to have aged out, but you may have a few people that are still in the system. By 24, they're probably aged out. So, and that's the last group that we have, which is between 24 and 27 years old. Just comparing a little bit with the US population. So you have the column that is our survey. So it's the sharing our survey and the sharing in the US population. We had a higher percentage of females than the US population, higher percentage of Black and African Americans, a much higher percentage of LGBTQA plus, and trans female or male in our sample than what it would be the average in the US. Where are those people coming from? We noticed that they were coming from all places in the US. And we actually have a few respondents that now live in Canada too. But it's really like all over the place. And we also took a look to see if they lived in urban or suburban or rural places. And over 80%, I think 82% of our sample lives in an urban place. But even though you see this map and see people all over, the most, about a third of people are actually coming from California, which makes it pretty interesting for this presentation, because this is where we live, right? So, and I think when in this state where there is a housing crisis for sure, and we're going to like talk a little bit about that in this presentation too. So let's talk about the open-ended questions. We had 9 open-ended questions. 2 questions directly asked them about their financial needs. And then you have 7 questions that just let people explore more about an answer in one question. So let's put as an example the question about education. Okay, you have a question of education, and then you can say, if you are in high school or if you are in college, what is your current level of education, pretty much. And then there would be another question, there would be an other for education, and that's when people could really explain about what they answered before. And those were very, very interesting. I'm not a qualitative researcher, but I still, reading the story of those people was fascinating, because you have some people who just said, well, I need money to pay rent. But you have people who really told their stories, who told us how they got into the system, who told us about their traumas. So it was very, very intense for me to just read their stories. But in this presentation, we're going to be focusing more about the 2 questions, which really literally about their needs. So what we did was, there were 2 things that Think of Us asked us about. One of them was if we could figure out who are parents in the sample, because they didn't ask a question that if the person was a parent or not. And we were like, yeah, we can do that. And what we use Python for that. So we created a list of sentences that are common to being a parent, like literally, I'm a parent. I have a daughter, I have a son, or something like that. And then we searched for this list of words and sentences related to parenting in the questions, in the open-ended questions. And then for the needs, I don't know who here is familiar with word clouding, but word clouds, but you can do something similar to that to Python. You can actually create the clouds. In our case, we just tabulated, but we create a program that search for like the most common words after accounting for like prepositions and pronouns, because of course those are going to be very common. But and then what we did, we end up with this list of words, and we went back to their actual answers where those words were found, and started reading to understand more about their needs. I'm going to first talk about the percentage of parents. As you would expect, I mean, as people are getting older, they're having more children, of course. And we had about 28% of our sample are likely parents. And then their needs. We saw a lot of needs related to housing, and sometimes it was just like people saying, well, I need money to pay rent. And sometimes were people saying, well, I need money to be able to find an apartment to begin with. We also saw a lot of words related to education, and sometimes were about themselves, were about I need money for college tuition, but a lot of times were actually for their children, which is for school supplies and textbooks and things like that. And one word that kept popping up all the time was car. And so we went back to read about what people were talking about cars. And that makes sense. I think even more here in California. If you live in San Francisco, you may not need a car, but if you live here in LA, you probably need a car. So we saw a lot of requests about just money to be able to buy a car or to pay for car insurance or to be able to fix the car. And of course, money for food, for things that are very, very basic too. Besides now we're going to get to a little bit to, rather than the open-ended questions, the actual categorical questions. They had a list of questions that were request questions, okay? So it would literally be like a question that was support to connect to professionals in the career of interest, and then the respondent could answer yes to that. The requests that were most common in our sample were these 4 requests. The most common one was the support to connect to professionals in the career of interest. And to me, that was very, very interesting for sure, because, of course, we're talking about people between 18 and 21, right? And that's an age that even if you're not in the system, you're trying to figure out what is going to be your career. But if you are in the system, it's very likely that at 21, you're going to leave the system. And you have to really figure out, right? Having a job is going to be very important to be able to have food, to be able to pay bills, to be able to not be homeless, right? So that becomes really, really important to them to be able to network, to be able to just talk with people who are in a career that they want to, or even figure out what career they want to, right? And now I'm going to start talking about things that that I'm going to be focusing mostly in this presentation, which is high financial insecurity, high food insecurity, and high housing insecurity. So there's this one question about financial security. The highest level was I'm having a money crisis, and the lowest level of financial insecurity is I have enough money for the next month. For food insecurity, the highest level was it's a struggle to eat every day. The lowest level was I have enough food, I'm good with food. For housing security was more interesting. Here you see a few of the options, but there were other options that the person could mark, like I live in a college dorm, I live with my family. So, and to me, it was very obvious. I mean, if you are homeless or if you're living in a shelter, yes, that's high housing security. But we still went back to think of us, and we were like, okay, what do you think about this, right? And what seeks to start telling us is that actually being couch surfing and also staying with a friend is a situation of high housing security, because you never know when your friend is going to be like, oh, I'm sorry, you have to leave. And then you'll be in a situation in which you're becoming homeless or you're going to a shelter, right? And that's why we classified as high housing security, being homeless, living in a shelter, couch surfing, or staying with a friend without a lease. And I'm going to start just with the more descriptive part of our results, okay? And just looking at, first at the money crisis, right? So for the age group, after you leave the system, it's like with the group of 22 to 27, almost half of people in that group were in the middle of a money crisis. When we compare to race, then about half of African Americans were said that they were having a money crisis. In the case of the LGBTQA+, we didn't see that much of a difference between the people who answer yes or that they are part of an LGBTQA+ group or in the people who are not part. We had similar results about the food, but I think it's interesting here because in the case of the high food insecurity, it seems like, I mean, by the group between 18 and 21, already like triple between the children that are still in the system. So it looks like this crisis starts even before, at least in our sample. For race, the most affected races are the African American and people who are biracial or multiracial. And again, LGBTQA plus, there is a little bit of a difference, but not that much. We didn't see that much of a difference, just in a simple descriptive analysis. And finally, the housing crisis. Here is the same. Once they start leaving the system, which is 18 years old, you already see that big increase. And by 22, we have like 1/5 of our sample. It was in a situation of high housing security, and that is very relevant, even more for where we live here in California, where we are in the middle of housing crisis. And when we start thinking that 1/3 of our sample is from California, and you have that many people who are leaving the foster care system. And they're living in a situation in which they are already entering in a very bad, high housing insecurity situation, is something that is really to think about. It's something that for policymakers to really think about even when they're just thinking about housing crisis in California or in LA in general. And again, the results for race were pretty similar. The races that seem to be more affected are African Americans and biracial and multiracial people. And at first, and I'm going to say at first here because we are going to see in another analysis, but just when you look at the descriptive statistics, it seems like LGBTQA plus group it's about the same. But we're going to see that is not necessarily when we go to one next level of analysis that I'm going to show to you guys. So one thing that we are talking about was one question that we had was, we have this sample, and we are reading their stories, and it seems like everyone is struggling. Okay, but we had this question of okay, what are the differences in the sample? Is this sample is everyone really the same? And I mean, of course not. So we want to understand what were some characteristics of people within the sample, if there was like different groups within our sample. And we started working with this researcher called Dana Viner from University of Chicago. And she recommended us to use latent class analysis. And actually, we create a model with her, different variables. But I decided to use the latent class analysis for this question of this interaction between demographics and being a high housing or food or financial crisis. So, and what LCA does is it assumes that you have this population or the sample, and assumes that you have subgroups that share some types of characteristics. And the first part to just run an LCA analysis is to transform the data in our case. So we transform our data to be binary. Okay, so for example, if someone is a parent, that person is going to have a 1. If not, it's going to be a 0. And we did that with our variables, and I'm going to show the variables that we're using in a moment. And what you do with LCA, you run several models. We use Stata for this, by the way. But you start with one class, and then you add another class, and then you add another class, and you add another class. So the question becomes, how do you choose among all those classes? I mean, which model is the right one? And we decided to use the Bayesian formation criterion. The BIC, it chooses it punishes a model, a statistical model, if you start adding too many things to it. be that too many parameters, too many variables, or in our case, too many classes. And the way that you normally do it, for each model that you run, you get a BIC result. And then you choose the lowest BIC result, which is going to be a model that indicates that has the best fit. And what LCA analysis does is it indicates the probability of a class membership, okay? Even though the actual class membership is unknown within a sample or a population. These are the variables. I don't know, I probably should be doing one by one, sorry. So these are the variables that we decided to use, which is being over 18 years old, age out of the system. And I know the two variables are very related, but as I explained before, it's not because you're 18 that you're out of the system. You may still be in the system. Having more than 3 placements in the system, being using a psychiatric medication, being a parent, being white, being part of a LGBTQA plus group, being in a situation of high financial or food insecurity. I decided to put the two variables together in here, or being in a high housing security. I still kept that variable separated. Now, this table has a lot of information going on, so I'm going to break it down more for you. So the first column is going to be our variable. The second column is the actual percentage in our sample. And then you have the classes. I didn't push the number of people who are predicted to be in those classes, but class 1, class 2 is predicted to have about 4,000 respondents each. Class 3 is predicted to have about 7,000 respondents, 4 about 3,000 respondents, and class 5 about 6,000 respondents. Whenever you see a number that is in bold here, is because the sharing in that class is higher than the actual. So it's almost like the actual is sort of a control group in a certain way in this analysis. So, and the way I want to break down this analysis is, first, I want you to just look at class 1 and class 2. Ignore class 3, 4, 5 for now. These are the children. And that's something you can see. You have a higher percentage of people who are under 18, and pretty much everyone in those classes has not aged out. Is still in the system. Also, I'm going to put this here so people can see. You also see here that these are classes with very low financial and food crisis or housing crisis, even more the housing crisis. Still, you can see the two classes are still different. In class 2, you have a high percentage of children who have 3 or more placements, a high percentage of children who is currently in a psychiatric medication, a higher percent of white children, and a higher percentage of children who are part of an LGBTQA plus group. Now, let's shift to classes 3, 4, and 5. Class 4 first. Let's take a look in class 4. These are mostly adults. That's the class actually from the most people who aged out. And this is a class that is very low with financial and food crisis and housing crisis. So this is a class that seems the respondents just have a more stable life. Okay. And I want to look at class 3 and 5, and I'm going to look at this in a different way. I'm going to actually put them in separated slides. So let's start with class 3. Class 3, mostly adults, and this is a class that is higher in financial and food crisis and also housing crisis. This is also a class that has more parents, and here's a class that has a lot of minorities. The indicator for white is 1 if the respondent is white. And you have here about 8% of people that are predicted to be in this class are white. And everyone else is part of a minority group, right? And this is class 3. So let's look at class 5, because this is the class where you see really with the highest number of people who are in a financial or food crisis or housing crisis. And what you see that is similar in this class, for people in this class, is you have a high percentage of people have had more than 3 placements when they were in the system, who are currently in a psychiatric medication, who are parents, again, and also who are part of the LGBTQA plus group. And that is something that was very interesting to us, and we even discussed with Sixto, because he was surprised to see that a lot of people who are part of the LGBTQA plus in our sample were also parents. So that was something that was surprising to him and also to us. But anyway, so this is the class here that is really in our sample is predicted to be in a higher financial and food and housing crisis. Okay, so let's go to the conclusion. So our study indicates that primary needs and requests from respondents were career-related issues, which was getting connected to people who can help them to get in the career that they want to. And I imagine they even getting connected to people who help them to figure out a career, because I don't know about you, but I can tell you that when I was 18, 21 years old, I was not very sure about my career. And in my case, there were people, I had a support around me, which if you are in the foster care system, you are less likely to have a financial support group. So being able to figure out your career like early on becomes very important, really, really important, because there's not really an option of going back to your parents' house if things don't work out, right? And that is the career will also help people with housing, with food, with paying bills and everything else. So we have like 37 states that are using our report to process data to make decisions about how to allocate funds in their state. And about our model, so our analysis indicates that in our sample, there were different groups. There were groups that were doing better when it comes to housing and finances and food. Normally, the ones that are very younger and are still in the system. And we had class 5, in which people have aged out, and those are people who have more placements within the system, who are using psychiatric medications, who are parents, and who are also part of an LGBTQA plus group. So, and that's it. Well, thank you to all of you that watch it, and a special thank you to Sixto and Dana and Think of Us.
Awesome. Thank you much, Priscilla. Appreciate your presentation on that. Very insightful to the issues that we're kind of discovering with that. So I guess at this time we have another about 7 minutes or so. Steven, do we have any questions in the Q&A that we can go over?
Yes. So far we've got 2. So the first is from Wesley. And so did you determine how representative your sample was of foster youth in general? For example, 20% of your sample was highly housing insecure after age 18.
No, we didn't. Yeah, and one of the reasons what we didn't is because we don't have that much data in general about foster youth, and that was something that was, by our knowledge, this is one of the first surveys that have really a high quantity of people. So that's why, of course, it's not random. It's self-selected. Of course, those are people who decided to answer the survey because they need money. But still, I think the results were pretty interesting.
Great. So the next question is my question, and so it's related, right? How did you deal with the problems of studying a population which is hard to reach or keep track of, and were there issues of missing or incomplete data that you would like to talk about?
Oh, we had a lot of incomplete data. I think one of the things that we didn't create the survey, right? That was something that Think of Us created,
Right.
and then they came to us. They were like, "Well, we have all this data. Can you help us?"
Usually, what happens? Yeah.
Yeah, it's usually what happened. So it was. I would say I think if we had created a survey, we would have created in a different way than it ended up being, the way that the questions were structured. And that was the part that was challenging, even to find a model, because first we were like, okay, well, how we're going to really work with this model? And that was when we decided to reach out to other researchers that work in the field to come up with the latent class analysis.
Cool. Thanks. So the next question is from Max. And he asked, were there any geographic trends? And for example, were there any differences for housing insecurity for California foster youth?
There were some geographic trends. I would have to go back to the report, because what we did, I'm going to actually leave my mail here so people can contact me, and then I can send you directly, because we also did for the most common states, which California was one of them. We create reports that were specific to those states. And then they really show how the housing security is happening for each of these states. So please, if you want to take a look at that, just email me, and then I can actually send it to you, and you can take a look at it. Sure.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So next question is by Kiva, and he asked, does the conclusion assist with grants and resources to assist the affected groups?
Yes, it does. That's something that we notice. I mean, talking with Think of Us, is that other states are really using this data to figure out how they're going to allocate the funds. And they're using also the individual reports that we created for each of the states. So every state that asks us, we just create a report and send it to them. So that's the relevance of the data, is really to create this bridge between this survey and also like what policymakers are figuring out about what to do with the funds.
Cool. Thanks. And I guess I have another question. So how novel is this study? Because it seems that the foster youth, right, are kind of understudied, and there may not be that much of this type of analysis done. So can you speak to that and sort of where the direction is headed?
So to our knowledge, you have smaller studies. You have qualitative studies of just interviewing people that are still in the foster care system or that just left. But the sample is normally smaller because they're more qualitative in nature. So we didn't see many studies that had that much data. And, I would say I wish we had something that is much more than 27,000. But that was a beginning. And one thing that Think of Us decided to do is they created another survey that I think they're still collecting the data, so they can continue this trend, right? Because one thing that they want is to really be a research lab in which they collect data to understand the experience of foster care children. So to start making decisions based on data, not just on what people tell about their stories, which is valid too, but it's just different.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Does anyone else have any questions? Don't be shy. I think we've still got a minute or so. Courtney, you're muted.
It looks like in the chat someone mentioned that over $50 million in funds have been distributed thus far through this data analysis. So that's amazing right there, actually. So wonderful fact.
It's great that this is actually informing policy decisions, right? I mean, that's
I was very happy with it. Actually, when I started working this project, I didn't have much of an idea about what was going to be the impact of it. It was just, they literally came to us and were like, we have this survey. So, and seeing that people are really using it, it's really amazing, because I'm not a qualitative researcher, so I didn't do much of the open-ended questions, but just reading about it, reading about the experience of those people is like, I mean, it's just fascinating to me. It's really, really inspiring, So it has been a very interesting project for me.
Great. It's great to hear. Well, I guess, I mean, this is the last presentation of the day. So I guess maybe we do have time for that. There's one more question in the chat. So Courtney, do the latent classes relate to any specific recommendations from your team about how to help the different groups?
They don't relate it to a question about how to help the different groups. We have a research question here that was literally how the demographic part was related to having a high housing insecurity and high food insecurity. I believe that as a consequence of our study is that it becomes that the part of the data, the results can be used to help different groups, but that is more like a consequence than that is how it started. If that makes sense.
I see.
Hi, Dr. Lambert. No, by the way, that was my mentor, Richard Lambert. He was still on home. Yeah.
Well, I guess, guys, appreciate that, Priscila. It was a wonderful presentation, wonderful questions. I'm glad that there's been so much impact from your research with that. I'm glad that something as simple as a survey has been able to produce this much fruit from it. So continue the great work. I'm pretty sure there'll be a lot more in the future for you. So again,
thank you.
I'd like to thank you again, everyone who's been in presentation today, all this session. Host Stephen, my co-host this afternoon. I appreciate your guys' support and help. If you guys want any more information about Priscila's work, please feel free to reach out to her via the Hopin app. It should be very easy to kind of see where her contact information is and kind of give her a quick one too about what you're looking for and how you can kind of do to support her. Also, I asked if you guys could check out the chat and complete the survey. Like, as she has a great survey, we hope this survey can help us out by figuring out what would be good, what would be bad, and something that you guys really want to see next year to kind of see some. So with that, guys, have a wonderful evening. Hope you guys enjoyed day 2 of DataCon LA 2021. Hope to see you guys for day 3 tomorrow. Have a great evening.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.